our chair. So I'll go ahead and let you guys vote.
I move, Piranha.
I second Commissioner Gonzalez.
All right, then our chair will be Commissioner Gonzalez for this meeting. Thank you very much. We can go ahead and begin now.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Gonzalez,
Present.
Commissioner Bridge,
Present.
and Commissioner Braxton.
Present.
Okay, so now we'll open it up to oral communications. You can call in. Our number is 805-875-8201. No phone calls?
No one on the online right now.
And no one in the public? Okay. We will go ahead and close oral communication and move on to the consent calendar. So we will do the approval of minutes and the 2025 Planning Commission calendar.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes from the 11th September meeting as well as the 25 calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, let's move to public hearing item number 1, Racine's Wine Production Facility.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. I have a request from Elizabeth Hannaford for the Architectural Design and Site Development Review, DR 2024-0002 for the Racine Wines Production Facility, a 23,320 square foot multi-tenant industrial building to accommodate wine production, indoor storage, parking, and landscaping in the business park and special event overlay zoning districts. Project is located at 1025 West Central Avenue. It is a 1.83 acre site. To the north of the project site is the Shumash parking lot. To the east is the Denmat facility. To the south is Central Avenue. Across from that is residential, and directly east, joining the property, is a vacant lot. The property fronts West Central Avenue. Existing conditions of the site is a vacant lot. The top picture is facing east, and the bottom picture is facing south towards Central Avenue. The proposed site plan, there is no current means of vehicular access, and there is a non-access agreement along the West Central property line. There is a recorded easement on the property adjacent 1035 West Central Avenue to be used for vehicular access and utilities. It is a 51-foot easement that the northern 26 feet can be used for the road and utilities. The project requires a total of 15 parking spaces, and it complies with the code by proposing 17 parking spaces. There are also 2 bicycle spaces required, which will be looked at during plan check review. The current parking calculations do not provide for adding additional office space for the new tenants. So we have added a condition of approval, P55. We've done the math and figured out that an additional 10 parking spaces could be added to the site. And when new tenants apply, if their parking goes over the proposed 17 spaces at that time, they could install more parking. The proposed easement is over here on the north side of the 1035 West Central to come off of Barton to access the site. There is parking proposed here on the north of the site and on the eastern border. There are a couple of parking spaces near the lease tenants over here in the dark gray. I held down. The proposed floor plan divides the 23,320 square foot building into 3 tenants. Okay, there we go. 12,375 square feet for Racine's wine production, 5,500 square feet for lease space A, and 5,445 square feet for lease space B. Tenants have not been chosen for the lease space A or B, and the hours of production would be Monday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., depending upon seasonal demand. This is the north side. I turned it so it would fit larger on the picture. The north side, so this is where the Racine entrances would be on the north end of the building, and they would take up the first half of this. And this is lease space A, and then on the southern end is lease space B. Absolutely. This way. There's parking up here and over here. The proposed building is a pre-engineered steel building with a cantilevered roof and modern style architectural features. The colors are earth tones and include a sandstone roof panels, Surrey beige wall panels, and dark bronze anodized aluminum window frames, fascia, and aluminum window canopy awnings. Architectural features include wood trellises at the entrances of lease space A and B and over the Racine Wine screened employee patio to the west of the building. The metal canopy covering the concrete bottling pad on the east side of the building, and an accent wood band of tongue and groove cedar siding on the north and west elevations. Staff finds that the project as proposed and conditions is compatible with nearby developments and substantially conforms with the city's architectural review guidelines. These are the west and east elevations. On the west elevation, you see the tongue and groove cedar and the trellises over the employee patio and lease space A and B's doors. The southern elevation is facing Central Avenue, has the window coverings, and the landscaping that is shown here is the landscaping that is adjacent to the building. There is the 25-foot road that goes around the building, and then there is 20 to 30 feet of landscaping from Central Avenue to there. And this is the north elevation of the building, the entrance to Racine Wines. The project complies with the minimum overall site coverage landscaping of 10% and the required parking landscaping of 10%. We have requested that the planters on the eastern and northern side of the parking lot be increased to 7 feet to accommodate planting of parking trees in the parking areas to comply with the Lompoc Municipal Code, which requires a number of 1 tree per 8 parking stalls in the parking lot. The project is currently proposing Italian stone pines to be planted close to West Central Avenue. The trees themselves can reach 80 feet in height and have destructive root systems, as seen along South 8th Street in Old Town. We have added a condition of approval to have the trees substituted with a different style. And these 2 large trees on the ends are the Italian stone pines, and here's the landscaping that is in front of, adjacent to West Central, next to the building. The project is categorically exempt from the environmental review pursuant to Section 15332 Infill Development Projects of the California Environmental Quality Act. The Development Review Board was held on September 17th of 2024. Application was circulated to various departments for review, and each of the departments provided standard conditions and project-specific conditions as necessary They're reflected in the conditions of approval for the proposed project. Was brought to our attention, we did have a carryover in the conditions of approval. P39 was requesting integrated vine pockets around the trash enclosure. Where there's no reason for those, there's not a trellis around the trash enclosure. So we are requesting that you would adopt Resolution 1010, parens 24, approving DR 2024-0002, and strike P39. If you have any, I'm available if you have any questions.
I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am?
For the future tenants, when they have to reevaluate parking, is the number of parking spaces going to depend on how they're going to utilize their space?
Yes, it has to do with, right now, there was, it's based, the parking that is calculated right now on the 23,000 square feet of in warehouse space. There is, I believe, 1,400 square feet of, I've lost
Yes,
it.
of office space.
1,400 square feet of office space. So the office space is calculated at one space per 300?
50, yes.
350. So if they add more office space, right now with
They'll
the,
use
with the
that
additional.
equation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right now with the additional 2 parking spaces, each lease space could have 1 parking space.
Right.
Or, excuse me, each lease space could have 350 square feet of office space in the building.
Building already.
So if they wanted to have 1,000 square feet of office space, that could trigger adding additional parking spaces.
Additional. And is that where, on the bottom of page 3 of the staff report, is that where it says they can add a maximum, there's room for a maximum of 10 spaces?
Yes, maximum of 10.
In addition to those 17?
Yes, ma'am.
So a total of 27. Got it. Is there any other questions for staff?
Did I hear, as a condition of approval, you had set the hours for them?
We didn't set the hours for them. They provided what the hours would be, and I was just providing them to you so you would know that they're not, working from 2 a.m. to 3 p.m. across the street from residential properties.
Commissioner Bridge, we did do that a while back, and we thought it was a little bit silly because if they wanted to amend their hours, they'd have to come back to the commission and revise that condition. So that's why it's not in the actual conditions. We do that at a staff level.
Okay, well, my concern is that, and it's a concern on the user's part here. These are wineries, and the grapes come in when the grapes come in. So, as I'm hearing the conditions, they would be out of compliance if,
Oh, no. The hours of operation are not listed in the conditions of approval.
no
The-
hours. I
No,
thought I heard.
the hours were just provided for your information so you would know.
So there's no non-compliance if they
No.
come in at 3 in the morning.
Nope.
Any other questions? Okay. We're going to go ahead and open to public comment, and if the applicant is here, we'll have you go first.
Stephen Reese, architect, representing Racine Wines. First off, I would like to acknowledge and thank Brian and Sherida for their help here. We worked together quite a bit on this and found consensus on a number of the issues that were present. So thank you guys. Little clarification on the parking. Our total office area is about 350 square feet. I applied that number, I basically tripled it and said this is the basic area for parking to establish an overall parking count. The rest of the building is taken at the general winery number. So I don't think wineries aren't known for having big office spaces. I don't think we'll ever exceed the current one. In fact, we'll probably have overflow. So that's really a non-issue for us. I have no issue with the condition. So we have reviewed the conditions of approval, and we accept them as they're written, with the addition of the removal of the vines on the trash enclosure. So I'm available for any questions that you guys might have. Also, representatives from Racine Wines are here if maybe if you have questions on operations or anything like that. So thank you very much for your.
I have a question, Steve.
Yes, sir.
You talked kind of quietly. Did you say you were happy with all the conditions?
I accept them. Yep, we're happy with the conditions. I know that's unusual for me, but no, we worked together quite a bit on this and found consensus and agreement. So, yes, sir. Any other questions by any chance? Okay. Thank you.
No other questions. Thank you. Any other public comment? No one on the phone?
No one on the phone, Chair.
Okay, we will go ahead and close public comment.
I'll make a motion we approve based on staff's recommendation. And did I hear you want a DR added to the,
No,
or was that just information also?
No, please add to your motion to strike condition of approval P39.
Okay, for that. So I make that motion to accept staff's recommendation and strike P39.
I second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, we are gonna go ahead and move to item number 2, TA 2024-0001, amendments to the City of Lompoc Architectural Review Guidelines. We'll start with the staff report.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the commission. Tonight, we have the amendments
Could I
to
just
this.
interrupt for 1 second? Are we doing the housing element tonight as well?
Yes, that's item number 3, Steve.
Okay. That's kind of time critical for you guys, right? Whereas this-
Absolutely, and I was going to
This
talk
one,
about
if
that.
this one got pushed to the next time, would we be hurting anything?
We might, and we can talk about that once we get to item 3.
Okay.
All right, this is item 2, amendments to the City of Lompoc Architectural Review Guidelines. The State of California is requiring municipalities to streamline residential projects and to provide objectives design guidelines. California state bills that initiate this requirement include Senate Bill SB 35, the Affordable Housing Streamlining Approval Process, Senate Bill 330, the Housing Crisis Act, and Assembly Bill 211, the Housing and High Roads Job Act. Development of residential and mixed-use projects in the City of Lombok that comply with the state requirements are eligible for streamlined ministerial review. In other words, they can go to building permit instead of coming to Planning Commission, if the projects also adhere to the City of Lompoc objective design guidelines. The standards found in the amendment architectural review guidelines are in addition to the existing objective standards found in the municipal code, building code, fire codes, and those requirements. Some examples of projects complying with the state housing law for streamlined review include multifamily with 2 or more units on a site zoned for residential development where at least 20% of the units are affordable to lower income households that are either on a vacant parcel that was used in the city's previous 2 housing element sites inventory or in the non-vacant parcel that was used in the previous housing element site inventory, and other requirements such as meeting certain wage requirements for workers. The proposed amendments are also associated with the previous funding that the city received as part of SB2 Planning Grants Program. With this grant, staff committed to amending the architectural design guidelines to facilitate streamlining the review of residential projects with the intent of priority to accelerate housing production. In order to comply with the state housing laws and the city's SB2 grant, planning staff is proposing amendments to the city's design guidelines to ensure housing projects that are eligible for streamlined review in accordance with state housing law would be reviewed appropriately with the city's objective design standards. These various proposed amendments are all consistent with the 2030 general plan and support various general plan goals, policies, measures, including urban design element, measure 6, which states that the city shall periodically review and update the architectural, landscape, and site plan review guidelines. In addition, staff has proposed amendments that will make the document more user-friendly and correct text within the document that is no longer applicable based on the most recent zoning code updates. The following is a summary of the proposed amendments. Removing vague, subjective language pertaining to design, such as strong visual relationships, visual sensitive areas, substantial screened, and visually interesting. Adding objective design standards for residential projects. So these are found in section 3. That is kind of, you could say, the core where the objective design guidelines are included in that section. Removing the sign section for the Old Town in order to reduce regulation, remove criteria that was too subjective, and remove redundant standards already covered in the zoning code. Removing references to Old Town specific plans since that has been rescinded, and removing old citations to code sections that no longer apply. Adding definitions for clarity such as compatible, major facade improvement, objective design standard, and open space. We're also adding and deleting certain graphics, such as removing the ones shown here because of some of the graphics were either too subjective, very ineligible, or conflicting with code requirements, such as the image shown down here below, where it talks about mechanical equipment, and it says here discouraged, and it shows all this mechanical equipment. Well, even the municipal code doesn't even allow that, so it's not discouraged, it's just prohibited. Adding graphics, such as this one, kind of illustrating and calling out the various design elements that are desired in cooperation with what we're trying to convey in the actual design, objective design standards. Showing, this is an example of a picture showing and illustrating what the code requires in terms of how to screen parking lots, such as providing landscaping and walls. And then some other changes that might not be as obvious are you've received the strikeout version, I believe, yesterday. And in the strikeout version, there were a couple of sections that weren't shown, such as the accessory equipment section and the designing for crime prevention section. The reason they weren't shown in the strikeout version that you received is because there were those were updated to the, you could say, the planning commission set, and it wasn't in the draft set. Overall, the document has been reduced by 26 pages from 80 to 54 pages. And one item to note is that a project has never been denied due to architectural design in the city. And then finally, staff recommends to move the interpretation section, which is found on page 29, which is section 6A3. This is regarding the definitions of should and shall, because that right now is in the Old Town section, but that really should be in the front of the document because those terms are used throughout the document. It's not, it shouldn't be just applicable to the Old Town section. It should be applicable to the entire document. So move that from section 6A3 on page 29 and essentially put it in section Roman numeral section 1, and then we'll create a large capital C, and it's essentially going to be on page 7. So staff recommendation is to adopt a resolution recommending approval of the amendments to city council or provide other direction. And that concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
I just wanted to add one additional element, expanding on a point that Mr. Stones made. So we did get funding, actually, but the majority of the funding that was used was for our housing element, but a component of that grant was updating these guidelines. And when we talk about the housing element, there's actually a program in there saying that we will amend the guidelines. So not only was it part of our funding, but it's also part of our housing plan to streamline and to be consistent with state law in the cases that Mr. Stones mentioned, affordable projects and things like that. So I just wanted to restate that additional information. That does conclude his presentation, and Mr. Stones is available for questions at this time.
Is there any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Before you, I'm gonna kind of be the, I didn't feel like I had enough time to put the level of detail that I wanted to go through this. I felt rushed. Yeah. I would really like to be able to have like an extra day or so. Like it was a lot to absorb and reabsorb and reabsorb. I feel like to me, if I had more time, I really can't. Just in the critical notes I have here, I feel like I'm missing out. And I don't know what the urgency is on this, if we could push it. I really can't give a good course or a way ahead because I just didn't have the adequate time to like review through the red lines and the documentation.
So the general plan element has a boatload of changes that have to be made to zoning and various other components of our organization. Is there, and you've already gotten the funding, so I'm kind of asking the same kind of question. What happens if we push this off?
Good question. So I told the state that we will have these adopted by the end of the year. So that being said, yes, we could have another meeting, but then it does need to go to council. And as we know, Commissioner Gonzalez cannot attend the meeting in November. So at the end of the meeting, we actually need to have a substitute planning commission date, maybe the third or fourth week instead of the second week of November. Getting really close to Thanksgiving holiday, but we do have another project, River Terrace, with some amendments, and now we have this. So it will be challenging. We would love to go over your questions tonight, but I do understand that it's a long document. We did reduce it by, what I think Greg said,
Yeah,
30
26 pages.
So, but we do understand that it does take time to review these documents.
Could we do the meeting earlier? Does it have to be after the 13th?
Well, that's a good question. It does make it more difficult to meet our deadlines. So the first week in November would be difficult. We could certainly talk about it, because since right now we're talking about this item, we'd prefer that it be later, but we can certainly talk about that. I'd have to look at some deadlines and see if we could meet those.
I didn't quite understand why is the earlier more difficult?
We have certain deadlines on the actually the counter that you just approved tonight. There's certain deadlines that we have to meet and timing and publications and staff reports and all those things. So it's just a kind of a
It's a
condensed.
your resource issue.
What's that?
It's staffing's resource availability?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I could double look at that, but maybe if we could go through the comments and then we can revisit the date for the planning commission meeting.
I can certainly go through mine, but I don't think that's going to alleviate the other commissioners' challenges, because they want to have more time. That's what I'm hearing.
Like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. To get it the way we got it, and I know you guys have probably been working on it longer, to really come and give true, accurate representation, I've never said this in a commission meeting before, like, I read it, I'm not prepared. Right, I need more time, like, I just need more time to really give clear and concise direction, for my council appointee or representative.
Well, I'd be willing to go through my questions as quickly as I can if that helps you streamline it in the future. But I support moving it out.
I'm gonna go grab our calendar so I can go through some dates. But I do know we can, yeah, we can. Okay, 3-minute break starting now.
gonna come back from our quick break. Were you able to figure out the dates?
Yeah, so if we did have the meeting, well, first of all, I wanted to find out, and City Attorney, should we be talking about this now? Is it okay, even though it's a different item?
Talking about what, rescheduling dates?
Yeah, even though it's,
Yeah, it's the same, you're rescheduling dates for hearing on this same item. You're looking
yes.
For continuance of this item to a future date.
Yep.
So it's still properly agendized.
All right, so we would have time if we met the first week in November. Our legal notices would need to be by October 18th, which is basically a little over a week. So we could do that. It's very tight, but we could do it. So that's information I wanted to give you. But I guess my question to the commission is, will that be enough time to go over the guidelines and, or do you think you're gonna need more time than that?
No, so we're looking at the week of the 4th of November? Or
Hold
is
on
it that last week of October? Because November starts
So
Friday.
the meeting would be November 6th, yes, the week of the 4th. So November 6th is, I guess what's a little bit challenging is I would have to make sure, there's a council meeting on, well, actually, the council meeting on the 5th was canceled. I have to make sure that this room is available, and that's the information I don't have at the
Well,
moment.
while you were out, we noted that there's just the three of us. We could, do what we did when this room was not available if you wanted.
Yeah, that, the other room, we could, yeah. So is that what you're favoring, is meeting the first week in November?
Yes. I think we're all available on that week,
Okay.
during that week.
And Brian, I've given you my notes, and I'd be happy to meet with you offline if you want, if
Okay.
that's acceptable, and to go over them to,
Okay.
and avoid that time at least.
Okay. I'm gonna motion to move this item to the next meeting, which will, do we have the date already?
That would be November 6th.
To November 6th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, that would be 6:30 for the time. We never usually change the time, so that would be 6:30. But we can voice
I-
that
I
at the
have
end
to
of the
ask
meeting.
I have to ask another question now. It's probably a lawyer question. There's a non-zero probability, but by the 6th, I will be a city council person.
I don't believe so. You may be a council member-elect, but you
Okay.
probably won't be sworn in until late December or early
Okay.
January, depending on how the
Perfect.
city operates.
Okay, we're gonna move to item number 3.
Yes, thank you. Before I start my presentation, I just want to emphasize that this one is extremely time-sensitive. Not that it couldn't be continued as well, but I'm hoping that after this meeting, we could move forward. I'll just put it out there. So let me see if this. I seem to always have problems with this. It looks like Greg was having problems with it too, but let's try this. All right, I'm gonna let Ceci do this because it's not working. And we actually bought a brand new one and it's still, okay, looks like now it's working. Yeah, not having any luck. Okay, can you advance the slide on that? Okay, This is Planning Commission review and recommendations to the City Council to consider a readoption. As we probably remember, this was adopted last November by the City Council. We reviewed at a special meeting in October of 2023, and it did get adopted. But after sending it for certification to HCD, they had further items they wanted addressed, and they had further items that needed to be revised. So that's why we're here tonight. Next slide. So as I mentioned, it was adopted in November, and we did what's called informal reviews by the state, Housing and Community Development Department. So the reason why we didn't do formal submittals to the state is every time we send it to them, they have 60 days to review it. And it's almost like this endless 60 days, 60 days, 60 days. But they have a process where we can do an informal meeting. An informal review, where we basically have a phone call and we go over what their comments are, how we answered their comments, and that's what those attachments are in the staff report. There's 3, April, May, and June. So that's the back and forth with HCD during that process. And then on September 19th, I was very happy to report to the commission and the council when it gets there that based on the changes that we made and the changes that you see in the housing element, the markups, the red lines, the underlining, that it does comply with state housing law. So that means that if no changes are made to the housing element and no changes are made by the council, it's basically a shoo-in that we will have an adopted housing element. So that's what they call basically a substantial conformance letter. Kind of a, a more roundabout term, but that's what they call it. Next slide. So I'm going to go through.
Could you just real quickly repeat that, or let me ask a question on that? Did you say we have that letter?
Yes, that's attachment 5 in your staff report.
Okay, and how long is that letter valid for?
That's a good question. I do not know. We want to, move it along quickly because we're already late. And as you know, we're subject to builder's remedy and other things and could potentially jeopardize future funding.
So the substantial compliance doesn't stop the builder's remedy?
Assistant Attorney, I don't really know the answer to that. We're under builder's remedy now because we don't have a certified housing element. That letter, does it at all stop?
The letter from HCD doesn't provide any protection to the city.
Okay. So real quickly, this is kind of a summary, and I apologize that it's a little extensive as far as you have red text that shows things that are going to be deleted and blue text proposed for new text in the document, and then we have yellow and green highlighting. The reason why there's so much is we wanted to be extremely transparent so you can see all the work the staff has done and the back and forth with HCD to get where we are now. Next slide. Next. So I'm going to go through, I can't go through every change, but what I'd like to do is highlight some of the important changes to the document. So it's broken up into two parts. There's a policy document, and then there's the needs assessment, which is part 2. So part 1, we have goals, we have policies, and we have programs, implementation programs. So there was no changes to the goals. One new policy you can see on the screen here, H-1.21. That's basically a code requirement, and so we went ahead and added that policy, and that was actually summarized very well by Mr. Stones in his meeting, that if sites that are previously identified in previous housing elements, if they are lower income sites, that they could just go straight to building permit. So that's the government code section. And now there's numerous changes to implementation programs, and I'm going to go through quickly, but I want to explain some of them and give you a little bit of background on those. Next slide. So 13 of the 29 proposed programs were revised based on HCD input. So I'm going to go through those 13, but I'm going to go through them quickly, and if there's questions, we can go back to these slides. But here's, we're starting off, housing priorities and funding, goals for funding affordable housing. That's a revised program. Regarding emergency shelters, that's just, we need to comply with state law. There was some parking requirements in our code that were required to amend to meet the emergency shelter requirements that the state says. I think we had like a storage requirement that isn't allowed. Next slide. Moving along, probably the bulk, the big ticket item are the municipal code updates. Commissioner Bridge mentioned that we need to amend the zoning code. So in that section, there's, again, the emergency shelters, there's development by right for certain affordable housing projects, which I mentioned, sites located in previous housing elements. There's also some commitments that we made to the state, or we'd like to make if this gets certified, for outreach for affordable housing and ensuring that we're making efforts to reach out to that segment of the community that needs help with affordable housing components of the city. And then small sites, the HCD was concerned that there's certain sites in our housing element that unless people consolidate the lots, meaning let's say a lot has like 4 lots, unless you consolidate that into 1 lot, which we require when people come in for a building permit, they wanted some insurance again, and they wanted to be confident that those would be required to be there'd be lot consolidations. Mixed use development, monitor development trends. This was constantly brought up by HCD, is they wanted to see that there's trends, not just in the city, but in the county, of some of the projects that could be built on these vacant or partially vacant properties. Next slide. Accessory dwelling units, we put in there that we are going to be funding, and we do have the funding, and we just got proposals from firms last Monday on our permit-ready ADU program, which I'm very excited about. So we put that in there. It's a good faith effort, and it shows that we're promoting the acceleration of housing, because if someone can come in with a pre-approved plan, the process for a building permit is going to be cheaper and it's going to be faster. There's also the place-based strategies. We talked a little bit about this last year. This was a big ticket item that they wanted. They wanted us to increase the floor area from 50 to 75% in the Old Town commercial zone. So right now, in the basically our downtown, if someone came in and they wanted to do 100% residential in downtown, we would say no. We would say that you need to at least do 50%, or sorry, 50% commercial. The other 50 could be residential. They want more residential, because that's what HCD is concerned about, is they want more housing. So, and we're fine with this. We think it's great that the building could accommodate more residential and not as much commercial as what is required right now. So we'd bump that from 50 to 75. The state, it's not just us, they're not just picking on us, but they also want us to raise building heights. So in the downtown, they want us to allow 4 stories, up to 50 feet. In the OTC and the MU, of course, OTC is the downtown, the MU are parcels. If we want, we can look at the zoning map later. There are parcels that are just outside the downtown. So it's almost like a transition where you go from residential to mixed use and then downtown.
I have a quick question. You keep using the terminology, they want us to, but in some cases, it's not really a want, right? They're mandating it?
Correct. Especially when it comes to
Are you
affordable housing.
Are you being, please don't take this as criticism, but are you being lax with the term they want us to do, for example, in this case? Or is this a mandate?
This is a mandate.
Okay,
Yeah.
so my request would be that when it's a mandate, because you lead me to want to challenge it if they would like us to.
I
Does
understand.
that make sense?
Yeah, I could
Thank you.
definitely word that a little bit better. That's a very good point. And then also in the residential zone, the R3 zone, it's required in order to meet state law, housing law, 3 stories up to 40 feet in the R3 zone. And actually, we reached out to some other jurisdictions, like the city of Goleta and 1 or 2 others, and this is something that they're continuing to require of others as well, not just us. Next slide. So moving right along, available sites inventory. This one's kind of interesting. So they are requiring us to monitor housing production on pending and approved RENA sites. So if we had parcels and projects that are part of our RENA, and let's say someone comes in, a good example of someone coming in and wanting to do a rezone. This happened about 5-6 years ago, but right in front of the CHC on West Ocean, West Ocean. That used to be a residential site. It's still vacant, and they built the CHC medical clinic in the back, but that whole site was actually residential, and they rezoned it to commercial. So if that happened today, the no net loss would basically require us, if we lost units from a rezone, we'd have to now go find other land to replace it. That's the no net loss provision. So that's in there. And then affordable housing incentives program, they're requiring us to.
Could you, staying on this one?
Sure.
I'm sorry to ask all these questions,
No, it's
but
good.
I just need to know. You say the rezoning, I understand that one. The no net loss, if we've said that a project to meet the RENA site, RENA numbers requirements, if someone comes and takes one of those lots and builds a department store on it, do you now have to go get a replacement for that?
So that's a very good question. So it would be site-specific. Where it gets a little tricky, and I do have the consultant tuning in, they weren't able to be here physically, but they could call in. We do have a buffer. So that buffer might help us if we do lose. I would have to double check that, but we do currently have a buffer on our RENA. But you're right, if that was planned in our RENA for residential, then we would have to go out and find a replacement. So a site that could accommodate residential and we have it in our inventory, and then someone builds commercial, if we went below our RENA, we would have to go and rezone other areas. And they want us to monitor this.
So let me just be a little more specific to make sure I'm internalizing this. So, an example is the Grange Hall. That was in our RENA numbers, and if they decide to put a restaurant on that spot, we would have to deal with a no net loss situation.
I believe we would.
Okay, would it be the city's responsibility or the people who own the Granges? So would they have to do some kind of offset?
It would be the city. Yeah, because we don't expect them to go out and do that. That would be the city. That's a really good question. And we do have sites that are partially developed where that could come up. So, but, it's our responsibility to monitor it. I personally do the general plan and reports to the state. So I do monitor that very closely. So if that does happen, then we would be on the hook, not them. Another one is
Would that throw you out of compliance?
I don't think so, because we have that buffer.
Well, let's assume for a minute you go beyond the buffer. Would that throw you out?
It could, yeah, it could.
And if you're out of compliance, do you go back to the situation we're in now?
No, I think we would just need to make sure that we rezone land to accommodate that shortage. We wouldn't have to go back and recertify, but they're requiring us to monitor it and also do reporting. And part of that reporting is through the general plan annual report to the state. They ask us questions about these type of topics. Does that help?
Well, it lets me understand it
Yeah.
better.
All right, the next one is affordable housing incentives. So they're requiring us, not asking, to amend development standards, including allowing a maximum height of 40 feet in the R3 zone. So I already mentioned that, but that could also include, and I think there's some more flexibility in this, but that could also include other things, like if we proposed, say, a reduction in landscaping, or lot coverage was increased and things like that.
So I have to go back, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can we add, you mentioned the medical center, that was the land I wanted to have in the arena. Can we add it and increase our buffer?
We could. I would not recommend that, Commissioner Bridge, just because we have come so long to get to this point, and quite frankly, I hate to admit this, but we are running out of our budget. We're already over budget. So we would have to redo the environmental document, and we'd have to go back through, do a reanalysis and things like that. But I think that, along with other sites, are in our back pocket, that if we do become short, we do have sites that could be rezoned. One of the ones that I have in my mind, if we need it, possibly if the commission and the council agrees with us, is there's land over by the theater that is kind of way back away from H, and it kind of lends itself to residential. Okay, so next one is place-based housing rehabilitation and community investment. We kind of talked about this in the environmental justice element, but it's prioritizing infrastructure improvement projects in low and moderate income areas. Next slide. Almost done. Last two are the underutilized non-vacant sites. So those are sites that already have like structure, kind of like the one Commissioner Bridge just mentioned. So adopt incentives to facilitate development on non-vacant sites with an affordable component. So that's a key theme with the state, is they really want an emphasis on affordable housing projects. So that will be another one that we're gonna have to go back and amend the code to allow some incentives. And then lastly, replacement unit program. Amend zoning code to require replacement housing. So a good example is, let's say there's a property that's partially vacant and it has like 2 little small houses on the property. And someone comes in and says, I want to build 100 units on this property, and the general plan allows it, and they've got a good plan to do that. But those 2 little houses are going to displace and be removed, and so there's going to be provisions on that to require replacement housing. So if you like demolish housing as part of a project. So, and part of that might even be the first right of refusal, or the people that live there might be offered, rent an apartment there or something like that. So next slide. This is the realistic capacity portion of the document. So we're now in part 2. So we did update that, the approach to the OTC zone. As you know, we're changing the floor area ratio and the building height. The mixed-use zones were revised to be consistent with methodologies in HCD's site inventory guidebook. There was also some changes to the capacity analysis that now utilizes development trend factors. For example, the likelihood of residential use, factors and land use controls to determine realistic capacity assumptions. And then program HA13, we talked about already, but we need to commit to monitoring sites in mixed-use zones and identifying alternative sites and or rezoning within 6 months. So that was basically what we were talking about. We would have 6 months. It wouldn't necessarily mean that we're immediately not in compliant, but we would have a period where, and that should be enough, especially considering we have some sites that we think we could meet that. Next slide.
Well, let's go back a slide. So mixed use is very confusing to me. Because the way I read the code, any zone use, as long as you meet the requirements of the code, the zone you're in, you can put a mixed use. Am I misreading that code?
A little bit, but you are correct.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
It basically comes down to the uses that they're proposing for mixed use. For example, let's say they want to do part commercial and part residential. So you would have to go, you would have to propose that type of project in the zone that allows those uses. So if someone came to the city and said, I want to do, commercial and industrial combination in the industrial zone, we would look at the industrial zones, which is business park and the industrial designation. It doesn't allow residential. So you wouldn't be able to do a mixed-use project in the industrial or business park, that type, that has a residential component. So as long as the underlying uses are allowed in the zone, you could do a mixed-use project, and then there's a separate mixed-use chapter in our code, and they would need to abide by those requirements, like performance standards, and there's even
So
restrictions.
Which zones do not allow residential
Well, it
in a
does,
mixed use?
yeah, business park and industrial are a good example.
Industrial does not allow residential.
Correct. Correct. So if someone tried to go into a mobile home park and put commercial and residential, that wouldn't be allowed.
I
So they
understand, I
basically,
understand that way, but I'm trying to understand, so industrial does it, what about commercial?
yeah, some of the commercial zones absolutely require residential uses. Now, some of them are very restrictive. Like, for example, as you know, along H, we have that H Street overlay that allows residential. But then if you go along Ocean, Highway 1, and then connecting to 246, most residentials aren't allowed in that area. They allow things like caretaker's unit, single room occupancies, but they don't allow like single family houses or multifamily. So it's very specific, or it's dependent, I should say, based on the zoning district and the allowed uses.
So, I like the Grange, because I know where it's at. The Grange is right now Assembly. But it's acceptable to use mixed use there, right?
We would have to look up what zone the Grange is located. I don't know offhand what zoning district, but I do know, because we use that site in our sites inventory, that residential is allowed.
Okay,
So
it
yeah,
is.
that could be a mixed-use site.
Okay, so based on what you're saying now, or what I'm reading up here, is you're gonna have to monitor that site.
Correct.
And if it's used for anything other than residential of some kind, they're gonna have to get a special permit, or you're gonna have to net zero it, or? Well, I'm trying to understand what you're saying here, and what I kinda understand what you're saying, but I'm not clear what it applies to. So how do I know?
So the best way to describe it is, as part of the analysis that the consultant did, and I do have them on the line if we need them to describe it better than the way I am, is we told HCD that there are certain zones, like the mixed-use zone, where we basically did an analysis that would show that we could produce a certain number of units in those zones, just like the other zones, just like the R2 and the R3 and the Old Town. So if we're going to say that we have the capacity to do that many number of units in those zones, if it doesn't happen, it's our job to monitor. For example, if they try to rezone the property, or like you said, let's say a site that could allow residential and we used it in our inventory and now it just becomes all commercial. So that would be an example. Correct. 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 Next slide. Just last couple slides. So 2 residential non-vacant sites were removed that were not meeting most of the non-vacant site criteria. That was 46 and 57. I apologize. I don't recall exactly what is on those sites. There was an analysis added for sites that were meeting only 2 redevelopment factors. So that was adjusted. And then there was additional details added in Appendix D. So Appendix D was requested by the commission last year because there are certain sites that we found may not work for residential, so some things were deleted or removed from that inventory. And then the school is still moving forward, but we haven't seen anything yet, but I've heard from them twice, and even went to a meeting, I think it was like maybe 6 to 9 months ago at the Dick DeWeese, and I ran into the superintendent, and she said they're still planning on building housing for their faculty and staff. And then lastly, the non-vacant site analysis was expanded for sites 54, 64, 67, 75, and 76 in Appendix D. Next slide. The environmental review is the same environmental review that we did last year. We updated it a little bit just to make sure that there was no errors or anything that wasn't, correct, but it's the same document that the Planning Commission recommended approval as well as the City Council. Next slide. So next steps, depending on what happens tonight, the recommendation would be forwarded to the City Council. I'm earmarking, depending on the results of this meeting, the second meeting in November for City Council. So if we're going to hold a public hearing at that time, November 19th, to consider the revised update to the housing element for adoption. If it is adopted, we'll submit it to HCD for certification, and based on that letter in the staff report, which is the substantial conformance letter, it complies with state housing law. So 99.9% chance it will be certified because they gave us a letter saying it meets the housing laws. Next slide. So we're simply asking tonight, based on the revisions that you have reviewed in the updated housing element that HCD has required us to make changes, that a recommendation will be made to the City Council for readoption of the 2030 General Plan housing element for the regional housing needs allocation. That's the sixth cycle. That does conclude my presentation, and I'm available. We do have the consultant that can tune in as well and call if we have questions that I cannot answer.
Would you like to start with your questions, Commissioner?
No, I think the brief was good. It answered two of the questions that I did have. One was, when does the well start to run dry, right? So you answered that question already for me. My take on it is I feel like we've done enough to this, right? If the state's coming back and it's kind of a give and take where they're already saying you're conforming to their standard, right? We got to act on that before they change their mind. I feel that we dot our I's and I crossed our T's on this. That if we delayed any more, they could come back and not rescind that letter, right? That conformance letter.
You want to start your list of questions?
Sure, I'll start. For some of this will be comments in the document, some will be just educating me. So I've heard the term affordability thrown around. But the RHNA numbers really are categories of extremely low, middle, whatever, I forget the titles. When you say affordability in these documents, are you just referring to the first two?
Well, I was just using that as a general term, but you're right. There's very low, and there's moderate, above moderate. So I was just using that as a general term.
Just a general term. And if someone comes in with a development that by definition could be called affordable, for example, the small housing one that's trying to work its way through, do they get covenants on their lease or on their title, or do they just get the credit because it's obviously
Yeah, that's a good
affordable?
question. I believe we would do a covenant, especially if they're asking for concessions and incentives or density bonus and things like that. We probably would lock them in to a covenant.
And that'd be for 20 years?
It's a long time. I think it ranges anywhere from 45 to 55 years.
Ooh,
Yeah, it's a long time.
there's an incentive not to do it, huh? All right, we went over mixed unit. So we got that answered. What is a local partnership program?
What page are you on?
I'm on the letter, page 4 of 5. The very first funding tied to housing elements. I don't know the local.
In the housing element, what page?
Not, it's in your letter.
It's a staff report.
Oh, the staff report. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. Thank you, whoever said that.
And you said that's on page 5?
4.
Okay.
Yes, 4. It's under funding tied to housing element. It's the very first one we're tied to. Housing planning includes the local partnership program.
Whoops, I'm on the wrong, hold on one second. Thank you. Oh, I had my, it's in the wrong one.
Isn't that where we were trying to, where we were doing the incentives? We were talking about in the other,
Okay, I'm there now. Could you just repeat again the sentence that you're wanting some
The very
clarification?
first sentence, under funding tied to housing element.
Uh-huh.
So it's implying we get some funding. State funding programs that incentivize greater coordination with housing planning to include local partnership program. What is that?
Yeah, that, I don't have the community development director with us, but that is something that we have we have incentives for affordable housing, like the first-time home buyer program. We have that, where we assist people to buy homes, but we also have programs that monitor and do repairs on affordable housing, because we do inspections, especially on the units that have covenants. So I personally have never
Could you
been
just
on.
take a note and let me, could you just take a note and let me know what that is?
Sure, I'm not familiar exactly with that, but, I could certainly, report back to you at the next planning commission meeting.
Sure, or just send me an email, whatever works
Yeah,
for
right.
you. So I think this is the addendum. We're probably in the section where you justify all the EIR stuff.
Mhm.
It's page 37.
Okay, what's your question on page 37?
Well, you're going to revise, I read this as an action, table LU-1 shall be revised. And I'm not sure, is LU-1 inside the zoning code,
That's a land use element.
the land use element? Okay. I believe the prohibited uses, including photograph studios and laundry facilities, are throwbacks to old timey.
We actually already did that. I'm glad you saw that. When we
I
updated
think
our
you really
code.
mean operations that use chemicals.
Yeah, but our zoning code has already been updated to reflect that. There's some notes in some of the land use tables, and that's already been, I believe that's already been updated.
So I need to go make a requested zoning change?
No, it's just, would you like to see an example? I can read it in the zoning code if you'd like to.
No, I can go back
We-
and
we
check
don't
the
have
zoning
to.
code, but, which is fine, I'll just go back and make a recommended change to the zoning code if that's already been implemented, because I don't think you care anymore about a photographic studio because they're all digital. You're really saying here,
Yeah.
we're really saying here, operations that use chemicals, I believe, is what we're worried about.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the original EIR, but you're right, now a lot of it's digital. I mean, there's no guarantee, there probably are some people that are still using chemicals, but
Well, and the laundry facilities, I don't think you mean the one that went in the old jetty, for example. I don't think that's what you mean by, but that's what
not,
I would read.
yeah, that's not dry cleaning, that's just,
It doesn't say dry cleaning, it says laundry facilities.
yeah.
So I go back to,
That's
I
true.
think you mean operations that use chemicals, and not you, it's the royal you. I'm probably as guilty as anybody of having that slip through, so. That's just an education one. So I kind of got hung up on CR2 on page 44. What does CR-2 mean? It's, just so I'm thinking with you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
You have the annotation CR-2A. I think that's an action on page 44. This document's creating a lot of actions for us to go to in their commitments.
Are you still in the addendum?
I don't know, am I?
Yes, it's 2 pages over.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And did you say that it was 1A or 2A?
2A.
Yeah, so, you're bringing up some things that was done in the original EIR that's like, basically almost like 12 years old. So, I wasn't here at the time, but somebody made a decision, it wasn't me, that we were going to put a hold on a historic landmark ordinance. What we did do is we do have a section of code that talks about it, and we do have that certificate of appropriateness, but I don't believe we actually have the historic landmarks ordinance. So we could double check that, but this is basically a carryover. It doesn't necessarily impact the housing element update, but there are some things that were not done and were not completed from the original EIR.
Okay, so am I reading this correctly, that we're committing to the state that we're going to go do what this says?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. Do I read this document that we are getting certified? In this section, we're saying we're going to go do this.
Not the ones that are not related to the housing element. We're only concerned about the housing element update, but you are seeing some language that is a little outdated.
Aren't we saying here that in order to say we're CEQA compliant, we have to go do these things? Is that what we're saying or not?
No, what we're saying is that the previous environmental impact report and the addendum that we've done has determined that there are no significant impacts related to certifying our housing element. You are seeing some language that's a little outdated, and I wish I could say everything that was done in that original EIR has been completed. Some items have and some items have not, but those aren't going to disqualify or prevent the certification of our housing element. In fact, the ones you're bringing up related to historical landmarks and things like that is unrelated to the housing element per se, as far as adoption and
Why is it in
certification.
here then?
Well, it's because it's from the original EIR. Instead of spending $1 million or $2 million on a new EIR, we're what we call tiering off an existing environmental document. And so when you do that tiering, you can't go in and do major changes to it. You have to basically keep it in place
Well,
and
what
add whatever needs to be added to address the project at hand.
Okay, so what is the 2030 conservation open space element? What is that?
One of the elements in our general plan, we have several
Existing.
elements. Yeah, existing general plan. Mhm.
Our existing general plan is the 2030?
Correct.
And this is saying we're going to modify the existing general plan?
Yeah, that particular one, just real quickly going back, we did, as part of that EIR, we did do a chapter in our zoning code called designation of landmarks. So that does have a lot of information on the process for the landmark designation and the criteria. But what we didn't do, and I think you brought this up a couple of years ago, is we don't actually have a committee. But we do have that in our zoning code for designation of landmarks.
I'm gonna come back to this one offline then, because I just don't get that. So, yeah, you could take a note on that. We're coming back to talk about this at another time. I don't want to stop this document from going forward based on that, but I'm a little frustrated about the historical part of our zoning and
Oh,
so.
yeah, that's something I could bring back at a later date to talk about. And you have expressed that in the past about historic landmarks, historic buildings, and even
So-
we made a
so-
modification 2 years ago on the certificate of appropriateness section of the code.
So, all of this EIR section, your basic opinion or position is it doesn't matter?
No, it's not that it doesn't matter, but you are finding some things that either have already been completed or it may be something that hasn't been done. I mean, it's a huge document.
Okay, well, let me pick on another one then, just to make sure I'm in sync with you. It's page 50. And it's the general plan EIR greenhouse gas emissions findings section, which I guess makes it the old EIR. And it said, down in the second bullet under AQ4B,
Okay, there, what's your question?
the city shall consider all feasible GHG emission reductions to measures to reduce direct and indirect. Is that staying, or is that going, or is that just old?
Wait, what you read was different than, are you referring to AQ4B?
Yeah, the second bullet.
Okay, it says through CEQA, oh, the city shall consider all feasible GHG emissions reduction measures to reduce direct impact. And are you asking Commissioner Bridge if we're doing that?
Yeah, is that?
Yes, as part of our environmental review, there's a specific section to address greenhouse gas
Is
emissions.
feasible include, 'cause I don't know what the term feasible means, but does that include cost?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm not quite sure, I'm not trying to be rude, I'm not quite sure how this is relevant to the housing element, but I'm gonna do my best.
That's what I just said, and you
Yeah.
said, no, it's important. That's exactly what I just said a minute ago.
No, we don't have a project yet, Commissioner Bridge, so we have to have a project in order to answer that question. Right now, it's an element, we're not reviewing projects for greenhouse gases. This is a general plan update. So, I'm just trying to clarify that's not relevant to the housing element update because we don't have a project yet. It's only
What do
an
you mean?
element.
This is on any project that you're doing now.
Right, but we
So
don't
Burton
have
Ranch-
we
Burton
don't have a
Ranch?
proposed project.
Yeah,
We have an
Burton-
update to an element.
You have Burton Ranch. Did you do this on Burton Ranch?
Absolutely, there was a large EIR done for Burton Ranch, absolutely.
And it included?
Well, that EIR
evaluation-
was done before this. That EIR was done in the early 2000s.
Okay.
So this EIR, I think was, help me Greg if you know, I want to say it was around 2010, 2011, I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I think it was around there or 13.
So, Did we look at all feasible GHG emissions in River Terrace?
Absolutely. There was an environmental
Okay,
document for
cool.
that as well. Absolutely.
All right, then I'll be quiet. Cool. You can see this section's not worthy of my time. That's all for that. I dog-eared them, so it takes me a second. I apologize. Okay, goal H4. I'm trying to, I guess it's 114.
Are you in the housing element now, or are you in the staff report?
I'm in the housing element update.
Okay. And what page at the bottom right?
8, well, it's on the left, but it's 1-14.
1-14, okay. All right, up there.
So policy H43 says the city encourages the use of active solar energy, but we don't. They had, in city council last 2 times or whatever they taught, we don't encourage solar energy.
Well, the California Building Code says that if a new residential structure goes in, that it requires, the California Building Code requires solar.
I
Long
understand
time
that.
ago, it was like solar ready or pre-wired. Now it's like you have to put solar panels on the house. So I guess the word encourage, because we're on the general plan, it's more general. The California Building Code requires those panels.
Okay, why is it in the general plan saying we encourage it? We don't.
Well, I would disagree, Commissioner Bridge. We do. I'm not in the utilities department per se, but I could certainly bring them in and they could talk about what we do. I don't have all the incentives and things like that. I do know what I've heard since working here with the city is that it has become less financially feasible. There aren't as many rebates and incentives as there was, say, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So there aren't as many people just putting them on their homes as there was before. But if a brand new home is constructed, they have to do solar.
Just a note for your future, on page 112. Go back a page where you've highlighted it in green.
Mm-hmm.
If you print it out, you can't read it.
Well, I could certainly read it to you now, and I apologize.
No, I'm not, I'm just telling you for future document. It was just,
Yeah, I agree. It is a little dark. The copy I have is pretty darn good, but I realize depending on how it's printed and where it's displayed, it can be difficult.
this one's an education. You talked to me a couple weeks and said we don't have any major transit stops. I'm on page 118. I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think it's the 11th bullet. It talks about major transit stops, but I just want to confirm, Lompoc has no major transit spots.
That's correct. There's still benefits of being within transit stops, but the one that you and I have talked about, both our transit center doesn't qualify, and you brought up the one in the Albertson Shop Center, although
I
Albertsons,
was pretty sure that one didn't.
it doesn't. So they have to have 15-minute headwinds, and our regional planning agency, which is SBCAG, has a really good mapping tool on their website, and it plots which ones qualify under the state law, and none of ours qualify. We don't have 15-minute headwinds. I think there's like only one in the city of Santa Barbara. It's pretty difficult to meet that requirement. I even asked our transit manager, I'm like, are you sure we don't
No,
have anything?
I believe you.
And they said no.
You just said here in your document that we're gonna remove the minimum parking requirements for development within a half a mile of major transit stops, but we have none.
Yeah, so that is something that we'll have to look at, and it is something that will encourage and will help development to go in, so, but I'm talking about state law requirements. I'm not talking about local, so we can, if we want to, here locally. If we want to do that incentive, we can. We're just saying that the state law right now doesn't cover us. We don't have to require that. But as you see, I'm gonna have my work.
Wait, no, you're saying something different now. Are you saying we're going to define some major transit stops?
Well, we do have a definition. I would have to work with the transit manager. But that is a really good point, because it is my understanding that if we do not have a major transit stop, that we do not have to comply with that. So I will double check. That's a really good point. I can check and,
Well, this would really, this led me down a path that said, not just this, but my understanding of the law, that much of Old Town would fall into this area, because the largest transit stop we have is right there on Cypress and I. And so when I said, okay, well, that's the one we've got, but when I called and asked you about it, no, we don't have any, but now here I read, we're gonna remove minimum parking requirements, so.
let me go ahead and phone in the consultant, because that is a really good question. I'm glad you brought it up.
All right, we can come back to that while you're getting
yeah.
them. Can you read?
Oh, looks like here he is now, if you wouldn't mind putting him in.
I have a question on this, but I don't know what it says anymore. Really bad. But I have a really good printer. Oh, I still can't read. Sorry. I'm an old man. I should have brought my glasses.
You know how to do it. Oh, you did.
What does it say?
Okay. It's not working. Oh, okay. Give me 1 second while we
Yeah,
get-
no. Hang on, I'll keep this here after 9.
Okay, give me 1 second. He's gonna call this number.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, they can. So,
Okay.
I know there's a delay in the streaming, but one of the questions that was asked is a good question by Commissioner Bridge, Ryan, is that right now, according to our headwinds and our existing transit center and transit stops, they don't meet the 15-minute headwind. Are you saying that even though they don't meet that, we still have to amend our code?
Yeah, that is a great question. So when we do the analysis that then feeds these state law updates, we have to just analyze, well, does the zoning code have a provision to cover this state law? And if it doesn't, we mark it as a constraint, and we have to include a program action to overcome that. Now, each year with your APR, when you're responding to HCD to say, hey, how do we implement our stuff this year? You can respond to that by saying, you know, for action 11, you know, nothing was required because we have none of these stops. In the future, should we have a major transit stop, we will complete that update, right? And having a response like that can be something that is okay.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Bridge?
What I think I heard him say is it's to cover us for the future.
We would have to respond in our annual reporting, and we can either amend our code, or we could respond that we don't have a transit center that meets that state code section. Which, that would be an interesting discussion to come back to, if that's
Well,
something that we really
No,
want to
it's
do.
not that this says you're going to amend your code.
I understand, but as the consultant said, is that we could still report why we did or did not do it. Is that correct, Ryan?
Yes. Every year you have to report how you've done on these, if you've done them or not. If one is no longer applicable or something like that, it never was applicable, but it was required by state law to be in the code, then you can report to HCD. This is not applicable to us at the moment, and they still may come back and ask you to put it in anyway. But in my experience, if it's not applicable, or something's been removed and it's no longer applicable, then you can report that to HCD and work with them. But we included it in the housing element short story because it's required.
Who makes the decision in our city whether this gets implemented or not?
I actually, because I do the reporting, and I've been working with a consultant now on this for 2.5 years, it would be me, but I usually don't make these decisions in isolation. We have our community development director, and then of course we hired a consultant to advise us. So we do use kind of a team effort in implementation.
So this says you're going to do this by February 15th. Have you decided whether you're going to do this or not?
Well, luckily we don't have to decide this evening, but if that's something you would like me to bring back at another meeting, I'd be more than happy to discuss that.
All right. Now I'm on I-19, and I can't read it for word because it's one of those green highlighted ones. It talks about this is where I came up with that question on affordable, because this talks about affordable housing, and it says that you get some incentive or something if you're doing affordable housing. Is that saying the person has gone and committed for 50 years to some level of affordability?
Ryan, in regards to the area for policy H1.21, and if someone comes in with a 20% affordable lower income project, do we know how long they would have to be locked in on a covenant for that affordability?
It's not outlined in state law as far as I know. That would be something that you would negotiate with them, I assume. The attorney may be better to answer that than me.
We do have inclusionary housing, and I could check that. I can read that to you in just a second, but we do have some provisions on affordable housing and how long they need to be. So if you give me a second, I'll just read that.
No, just take a note and get back to me. It's not.
Okay, all right.
The other thing for a future time, well, I have two feelings about this. One, we have these things that are talking about past marina sites. And sometimes they say to include this one. And I think this had some of that in there. I can't, what does it say about pests?
It says, including vacant sites that identified in the fourth and fifth cycle. That part?
So we're identifying in this document, see if I can get this right. It's kind of esoteric, but I don't know if we did it for the record building, but let's just for conversation's say we did. You took your RENA number and said, one of those is going to be affordable. They haven't built it yet. You don't know what it's going to be. We did that on lots of sites, right? We said, the Grange is going to have 30 houses on it. We're going to take credit for 4 affordable ones. Am I correct in that assessment? And not specifically on the Grange, but on lots of the sites we picked?
So I'll go ahead and answer that, and then Ryan can piggyback on my response. So we have worked with a consultant to look at what those sites are in the fourth and the fifth cycle. So I don't know from the top of my head by memory if we used that site that you
I
referred to a few
understand that.
times, if it was in the fourth and fifth cycle. But
Well,
if it
it'll
is,
start to apply to this cycle too, right?
is that correct, Ryan, also the sixth cycle?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I apologize. It's hard to hear.
Yeah, I apologize too. It is a little difficult. But the section in
And it's just an
policy.
example of where we've done this, so.
Right, well, let me just explain. Under the municipal code updates, HA8, there's a bullet point at the end that talks about codify policy H 1.21, and it talks about allowing development by right if it was, if they do a 20% affordable project, and it was on, that site was in a fourth and fifth cycle, non-vacant site. This only talks about the fourth and fifth, and Commissioner Bridge asked if it also applies for the sixth cycle.
Okay, so how that applies is if we used it in this housing element as a lower income site, and it was also in the housing element in the fifth cycle and the fourth cycle, then now that site, since we used it in the sixth cycle, we have to allow for that by right processing if it comes in as 20% affordable.
Does that answer your question?
Well,
Would
it
include the
answers
six.
part of it. Now I'm trying to get to the affordable. Does that mean,
Well, that's actually outlined here. It's lower income. So that's
low
a
income
certain,
than that?
certain
I can't
level.
read that one, okay.
Yeah.
So by right, and the next time we do this now, the ones that we've identified in here, well, let me go back to my question. Is it not true that, and I would have done the same thing maybe, I'm not, but we took a bunch of empty land and underdeveloped land and said, we're gonna count that to our RENA number. And statistically, 4 of those units of the 20 are gonna be affordable. When the guy comes back in and he uses those numbers, does that mean by right, he'll now be able to go through the process?
If it meets this requirement. So there's several tiers. There's a 20% affordability, there's an income category, and if it was used for that income category in the fourth and the fifth cycle, then the answer is yes.
Is it and or?
I believe it says and, correct, Ryan?
No. What it is if it's non-vacant and it was just used in the previous, so the fifth cycle, right? Or if it's a vacant site and it was used in 2. You don't get as much leeway with non-vacant sites. So as soon as you use it twice, they make you put this standard in place. It's a state requirement.
Okay.
I didn't quite catch that whole thing. Was
Well,
it and or?
Well, if you read, and I know it's hard for the copy you have, and it has a pretty strong glare, but if you read, it says including vacant sites that were identified in the fourth and fifth cycle, so that's pertaining to vacant, but it says fifth cycle and non-vacant sites identified in the fifth cycle. So one is referring to a vacant site, and another one is referring to a non-vacant site. So those are what we call those unutilized sites. So you might have like one building or two buildings, but you have area where you could build housing.
Okay, so my concern, it's probably, me oh my, but we're heading down a path where the state keeps coming out with, oh, well, we meant this, but now we're gonna imply this. And in our wisdom, we have taken lots of our underutilized properties, and we've put in there that there's affordable housing in them. And I'm not gonna say they're all, but we've done it for several. And the next time we go through this review, they're gonna say, by right, you can now use those. So, that's a scary thing to me.
Well, I mean, one thing that I have in the 8 years I've been here with the city, when a housing project comes in, usually we're very supportive. We understand that we're only building sometimes 8 to 12 units a year, if that. And so housing projects that do come in, we have been extremely supportive to get going and try to get housing built. So this could be seen as a streamlining method, and also what the state is calling, but everybody else too, is accelerate housing production. We are struggling to build housing. So some of these provisions are going to help Lompoc build more housing.
Well, one of the big arguments we've had all along to get this thing done is because if we don't get it done, builder's remedy will come in. Builder's remedy and by right sound a lot alike to me. So it's good in one case and bad in another. I don't quite understand that, but.
Well, builder's remedy, correct me if I'm wrong, builder's remedy, it's not just a streamlined process, but they also, I believe, don't have to meet all the requirements in the general plan because you don't have a certified general plan.
I think by right has a lot of those same components.
No, but even if it's by right, you still would have to meet municipal code requirements. So
Well,
there's
you
a
still
big
have to-
difference.
You still have to build building code requirements in the.
Right, yeah, you don't get a skirt building code, but I'm talking about the other requirements.
Okay. On I-21, okay, so the small sites on I-21, you're gonna contact all these guys by February 15th. That's what
So
that's.
I have my work cut out for me. The
Okay.
municipal code updates is a lot. And so,
I'm not gonna belabor
I
it.
wish I could hire another planner to assist me, but that's the hardest section of the general plan is how many things we need to do.
Yeah.
And we do need to do it quickly, so, we're gonna do our very, very best.
On page 127, how do I interpret the timing for HA 17? Is that really a complete?
What part of HA 17? A, B,
The
C,
timing.
D? Oh, the timing, August 2023. Yeah, that's Ryan, that's a really good question because we've passed. So could you respond on the timing of the at-risk affordable housing units, A-A 17, Ryan?
So yes, we had initially set that date as 2023, and just the HCD review has taken up all of our time. So we will need to report that that has not been done, but that the city is urgently working on it, and the city does need to begin implementing that program.
So why don't you just change the date to February 15th, 2025?
Well, I think the reason why, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, is this sixth cycle started in 2023, so we can't really go back or change it, go forward, because this is the cycle, which started in February of 2023 and it ends in 2031. So I don't think we can change that. Is that correct, Ryan?
We could work with HCD to update that number and come up with a new timeline, but we would have to call them and you know, we can do that.
That's your call.
Yeah, that's something we can think about, but, I mean, it's basically going to be us reporting in the annual report, and then I would work directly with the housing division.
131 is the same kind of thing. It says you're going to adopt a priority processing procedure by 2024, so you've got,
Oh, and also just kind of stating the obvious, but since you're bringing this up, so this was adopted last year. So remember, this document,
well, that was my
no, it wasn't
question.
certified.
You
It
completed it?
it was adopted, and it does apply to the city.
So
so-
have you completed it then? That was my first question.
Well, this takes a lot of time to do the annual report, so I would confidently say, no, I haven't done everything in here. It's almost virtually impossible to do everything every year. It's like, that's why it's an 8-year time horizon, because you can't do everything and,
Well, I understand that, but we are sending in a document to the state. It says we're doing all this stuff to be compliant. We put all this stuff in here, and some of it's required. Obviously that wasn't required, or we would have done it if it was required.
no, it's not that it's not required, it's just we can't get to everything. You know,
Well-
we have a timeline, but we're trying our best to get to everything. It does take staff, and it does take, you know, sometimes you need to work on these throughout the whole reporting period or the cycle, which is 2023 to 2031.
Well, I know, but when you say by 2023, that means you're gonna do it in 2023.
That's a good point.
You know, don't. All right, so you got another one that I think is I'm gonna come back and keep asking you about. It's a priority processing procedure is going to be produced for affordable housing incentives on page 131. And
Oh, I'm sorry, can you be specific? 131, affordable housing incentives, which one?
item F on the
F,
timing,
okay.
so.
Okay.
Okay. Page 266, 2023-31 housing element.
Did you say 266?
I did, sir. Yes.
Okay.
You have a table there. I think the one bedroom must be a typo. I just have a hard time believing that that's true, 800. You believe that one?
No.
The current market rents?
Yeah,
How does it jump from 800 to 2,000?
I think that's a typo.
Well, I've always been told that by real estate professionals, there's a big difference between a 1 and 2 bedroom.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
Yep.
I have a granddaughter.
This is
who's going to-
2022, so.
I know, that's last, 2 years ago, but, okay. 281, table H32. No, maybe this is a procedural question. I believe that you are changing the code to recognize emergency shelters by right.
Correct, and then there was also a parking requirement that needs to be corrected in the code.
Right. On that table, under MUs, which again confuses the hell out of me, because there's no, if I went to the zoning map, I would not find an MU, right?
Oh, no, that's not correct. We have an MU zone on our map, and we can even pull it up on the screen right now
Okay,
if you'd
well,
like to see
then I
it.
need to go look at it again.
Yeah,
Because I
absolutely.
thought it overlaid them all, but I don't think CUPs will be required anymore, based
That's
on
correct. Yeah, we have to change it.
So this table has to change then, right?
Well, that's part of the municipal code updates, is that we need to change it. That's a good catch. I mean, it's representative of what's the code, but we have to, as part of our municipal code updates, we need to
Okay, so
change that.
that's,
So that's a good catch. But it is reflective of the current code.
I got lost on page 297, local housing ordinance. You have this magazine type insert.
What part of, on page 297?
The magazine insert, or whatever you call that little,
Oh, to
Between
the
the two
right?
lines.
Where it says the Old Town redevelopment project?
yeah.
What's your question regarding that?
It says, since then, the project area has been amended twice, resulting in a redevelopment overlay. So do we still have a redevelopment overlay?
So we still have redevelopment areas. There's a 1 and there's a 2. Obviously, we don't have funding. Redevelopment funding went away. And there has been talk of removing references to it in our zoning code. We haven't done that yet, but we clearly do have the map that we refer to. And yeah, those areas are designated as redevelopment areas 1 and 2.
I'm mistaken, I didn't realize that. Oh, you're not gonna like this one. Nobody's gonna. A14. A.
You're in the appendix.
Alpha.
He's in the appendix. Okay, we're there.
Yeah, I'm almost embarrassed to say this one, but it bugged me, so I'm gonna say it. What does the word diverse mean?
Did you say diverse?
Yeah, what does that mean?
I mean, we can look up the dictionary version, but usually it means you have a variety of something. It's not just like all,
Okay,
Same
then
thing.
I believe Lompoc is less diverse than most of Santa Barbara County.
well, that's a good question.
Not more. We have 56% Hispanic or something like that. And if you look at the other areas, they will have lesser Hispanic, so they would be more diverse, I guess. If you have a majority of the population being one thing, then it would seem like you're less diverse.
Is that the recent though? Because this is showing from 2019.
Pardon?
Your statistics, are they more recent? Because this, it's
Under
probably
local-
basing it off
Yeah,
to,
but it's just saying local trends. Lompoc is more diverse.
Yeah, this is a little bit tricky, but I'm gonna go ahead and kind of explain my take on it, and then our consultant Ryan can give his take. So, if, let's just, it's a given that the Hispanic community has been shown to be, I
The
guess what-
minority.
a minority, yeah. Thank you. You took the words out of my mouth. So we have a larger minority population in Lompoc than other areas. Actually, our new development assistant here speaks Spanish, and she is extremely helpful because we have a population that only speaks Spanish, and she's able to help them. So we do have a pretty big population of Hispanic people that do not speak English as their first language. So my understanding from here is that we do have a larger diversity when other areas don't, of that minority
You mean
population.
a larger percentage of non-speaking English people then?
Right, of that minority
It
population.
doesn't say that.
Okay, well, that's why we'll get a second opinion. Ryan, what was your take on this table
Does that
A3?
redefine the word diverse?
Let's see. So the question is about the first sentence under local trends, if I heard, that's saying that Lompoc is more diverse compared to most of Santa Barbara County. Is that
Yeah, that's the one that he was honing in on, yeah.
Yeah, and so that sentence is backed up by the following figure, A1, which shows that Lompoc has a greater percentage of non-white folks within the population. So you could read it as more diverse. You could also read it as a larger
could read that as
proportion of
racist.
non-white population than the rest of the county.
I could read that statement as racist. The one he just said. That was a racist statement.
I don't understand that the state has us evaluate these. The state provides the data. They're the ones that came up with the map of percentage of non-white population.
That's not the word you used in the sentence.
I think it's up to the interpretation of diverse. Right? I think
That's
we're-
what was my first question.
I think we're totally into the weeds on diverse. I mean, I think if we look at what we use for the administrative element plan, or administrative
Environmental justice, yeah.
right, environmental justice plan, right, if we stay with that core vocabulary, right, because what do we say, challenged, right, we're culturally challenged, or whoever the challenge piece of it was, if we stick with that same vocabulary in both documents, I think we're fine, right?
Well, let me ask you this, Commissioner Bridge, just so I can understand more of the context. I know we're kind of trying to have some interpretations on this, but what's your concern in regards to the housing element specifically, connecting that to the housing element overall?
I'm just going by accuracy of what the statement said.
Okay.
It said we're more diverse, and we're not. And it's probably a bias of mine because I see it in all sorts of documentation in the world today, which talks about minorities, but they don't really mean minorities. They mean people of color. And when I see an inaccuracy like that, I'm going to point it out because it's racist. It implies just because you're a person of color, there's some hindrance there, and I don't believe that.
I think perhaps you're misconstruing the purpose of the analysis, if I may. HCD requires this so that we can show that we don't concentrate lower income housing in areas with greater percentage of non-white populations.
Of what
So
population?
we do a regional analysis and then we do a local analysis. And
Did
we
he say non-white
look within the
population?
region and within the city.
Did he say non-white population?
Go ahead and repeat that. I didn't hear that, Commissioner Bridge, but could you just repeat that one more time, Ryan? How it's a requirement of the state?
Yeah, so, I apologize. The purpose of this analysis is to show that we are not concentrating lower income housing in communities that already have high percentages of non-white populations. And so we have to provide both a regional analysis that looks countywide as well as a local analysis that shows within the city how do our sites relate to the populations within the city.
Did
Well,
that
he
make sense?
He conflated economic demographics with Hispanics, is what he did there. So I'm not going to argue it anymore, but it's not written correctly. He really means people of color. And to say it's diversity, that's just not true. So that's fine. I'm not going to argue it anymore. I can't tell what
I just want to throw a caveat there. I think the way it is written from when you use the word diverse, right? Diversity, inclusion, right? Including or involving people from a range of different social or ethnic backgrounds and or different genders, sexual orientations, right? So diverse in that context covers all aspects. You're diversified. I think it is right in the right vocabulary. It is meant in the right context.
Okay.
I'm on A94, but I can't read.
Okay, A94. And what is your question on A94?
Okay. So on A94, what does the word segregation mean?
Okay, what bullet point or what,
Well, it's the first paragraph. I can't tell you
Of
what
the
line.
green highlight.
okay, so it says, "The city will implement a variety of programs, including place-based improvement programs, targeting areas of high segregation and poverty, Census Tracts 2909 and 2710, in an effort to provide equal access to opportunities and housing for low-income and historically underserved residents within the city." So I feel like it's a little bit of a sociology class tonight, but we will do our best to define terms and talk about these topics. But Ryan, do you want to, and I don't mind chiming in either, when we state high segregation, what do you mean by that so that we can answer Commissioner Bridges' question?
Okay, yeah, so those areas are defined within state law. It's, I don't remember the exact calculations, but it's something like the area has a majority non-white population, or the census tract or the block group has a majority non-white population, and they also have lower incomes, and there's a threshold at which that
Well, let me ask the question here.
so
And then I'll-
the state provides those maps and identifies those areas for us. And then we have to, whether or not you have an identified area of high segregation and poverty, you do have to include programs that are what the state calls place-based strategies for community revitalization or improvement, where we're talking about CDBG programs and other things that the city is doing to improve infrastructure, parks, housing, whatever it may be, in low and moderate income census tracts.
So would those words be exactly the same? We know what area we're talking about. It's where the apartments are. It's where people who don't have as much money as perhaps me. So there's no question there's an economic demarcation. If those people were, whoever those people are, were all white, would you still use the same word?
Commissioner, if I may here, if your concern is over the word segregation, the term census tract designation is a term of art used by the federal government and the state in census tracking. It's an actual formula and a term. So this is actually referencing a very specific set of numbers and facts that are determined by state and federal law. We have no control over that term, whether segregation is the appropriate word or not, but it is the word used under federal and state law.
So the word segregation is a state
Census
term.
tract, if you're talking about census tract segregation is a term of art in census calculations.
So then I should be able to go to that document, see the definition of that word.
You should be able to do that. You could Google it. You could use any number of finds to see that that's a regularly used term. There's a formula involved based on, and again, this isn't an area of expertise for me, but
I will
I'm
do
just
that.
pointing out that this is not a city or policy or in any way a use of a word for a political purpose or any other. It's an actual term.
I'm not trying to use
used
it
in-
for political purpose. I'm trying to be accurate.
No, I'm saying that staff isn't
Okay.
it would be inappropriate to alter that term because it does reference something specific. It would be inappropriate for us to alter that term.
Okay. So that applies to all of A93 then. Wherever that term is used, that's mandated by the state.
I don't know if it matters, but there are some good information online. I'm just going to read it very quickly since this tends to be a topic tonight, but it talks about how there's types of segregation. Some of it's geographical segregation, rates of two or more populations which are not homogeneous throughout a defined space. school segregation, housing segregation, so that's what we're talking about now, racial segregation, separation of humans and racial groups in a daily life, religious segregation, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that's something you could look at in your own time, but it clearly is, and I appreciate the assistant attorney saying that that is a clearly a legal term defined in the state.
Specifically
Well, I
with
appreciate
regard to
that as
census
well.
tracts.
I'll look that up, because it's sprinkled all through this document, and I'm proud of Lompoc because I believe we're well integrated. And I do agree we have some economic segregation. And it may result in what appears to be ethnic segregation, but I don't believe it's by intent. And some of these documents could lead you to believe that. So, enough said.
Do we have any comments from Commissioner Gonzalez or Commissioner Braxton?
I've worn them out, I think.
So if we were to change a percentage of the document from a conformity perspective, okay? So if you go back and, you know, if there's substantive changes to the document, right? Did they, in the letter that they provided to you, if you change greater than 10%, right, does that remove that conformity policy letter? So if you go back and say, hey, I got these 15 questions, right? Does that retract or rescind that letter that you received?
Well, I think we're at the point where, if I may, if you do want to change something, what would be best is tonight you would make your recommendations of what to change, and then we would carry that up the ladder to the city council, and then the city council would say, yeah, make that change, or don't make that change, and then it's my job and our consultant's job to say, if you do change that, and I don't even know what changes you're referring to, that could make us not compliant with state law. Right now, we're compliant with state law. The way it's worded and the way they have reviewed it, we are compliant with state law.
I'm just throwing it out there, if we did, that we could rescind that.
It just
Our
depends
little-
on what. I'd have to have specifics, but we could. I would agree we could. I just would have to know what you would want to change.
Nope, I just wanted to throw that out there, because if
Yeah.
we make any significant changes.
When speaking on the phone reviewing this document and asking questions to HCD, when they were wanting, well, their, as you said, requirements or mandates, did they give us any source of like, this is why we're requiring it, or is it kind of just phone conversation?
No,
And
they
you
did.
noting it.
Ryan could expand on what I'm about to say. But a lot of the conversations were based on state law, but also it's based on our analysis. So if we're saying that we're going to build or we're going to accommodate a certain number of units, they would come back and say, well, if you're going to make that assumption, then there's some things that need to change. For example, building height, the amount of residential that could be in a mixed-use building. You need to provide more. If you're going to say this is going to happen, you need to incentivize, and you need to be more flexible with development standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all those are in those attachments, 3, 4, and 5, or 2, 3, and 4. 5 is the letter, where they would comment, and it's a combination. It's based on our specifics to our city, the parameters, the assumptions, and then state law. And I don't know, Ryan, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say that all of HCD's comments are documented either in the formal letters or the informal responses. Those letters really drive our revisions. We call and we do have conversations with them when we have questions about, hey, why are we doing this? Where's this required? What is required? What do we need to do? What have other cities done? So we have those conversations, but all the requirements are noted in all of their comment letters. And I will say that HCD reviewers have a 150-point checklist that they go through. And if they can't check it off, they copy and paste the response in. So their responses don't often have a lot of specifics, so those conversations with them are really important. You know, hey, I noticed that you put in this comment, you know, how can we, the city of Lompoc, start to deal with that unique to our circumstance?
Got it, thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? Okay, we'll go ahead and open it up to oral communications. Or sorry, public comment.
Nicholas Gonzalez, resident of Lompoc. So, as a resident and as someone who has, you know, superficial understanding of planning, what I'm really concerned about is that there's been changes made and you're going this conversation back and forth with the HCD. And it's like you made a plan, and so your plan is fulfilling their mandate to some extent. And so here's my big concern. You've gone out and you've identified all these sites. We know that the law requires that when certain sites are in the element a certain number of times in previous elements, they become developmentally by right, and you lose a lot of control. I've been scratching my head trying to find where's the list of which sites were on previous elements. And I know that it's somewhere, but I haven't been able to put my finger on it. So much paperwork. I don't know how you even were able to digest that in the period in which it was out. But you're going to make a decision today, and some of those sites are going to be developable by right, and the community is going to have absolutely no say in that moving forward. Secondly, there's a limitation that gives them the right by 20%, but somebody also could come in and do 100% affordable, thereby removing prime pieces of commercial property from the tax rolls and all the other things that are associated with that. I think at minimum, before you make these decisions, you need to see that list of, and I don't know, maybe not, I'm thinking out loud, because I don't know at this point what you can really do. I mean, there was a simple solution. You got a project now out in the Bailey corridor that you said you couldn't do. It's there, okay? And that, how much is that project going to relieve the housing demand for, because you're forcing a round peg into a square, or a square into a round peg. Now you have to, you're going to fundamentally change Old Town, and these changes were originally based on the fact that we had a transportation hub and that you were going to have no parking. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought you've already evaluated projects without parking because of a transportation hub. And now you're talking about going back because I've never seen HCD demand height. They demand accommodation of the units. I have not seen them start getting into buildings height and now floration. Again, it's all driven by the units. So one, what does Bailey Avenue do to the future housing demand that we had on there? Does that give you the buffer? I haven't heard of that, how that's taken, because it gives you the buffer, then you can keep your heights where they're at. You can keep your floor ratios to a smaller extent, right? And then go back and revisit some of these sites. Don't put a site on a site if you don't have to. If you Bailey corridor is going to give you, that Bailey project is going to give you some of those housing elements that then is going to be by right development and take that ability for the community to have input in it down the road. I mean, the state and some of the politicians are planning some really scary things. There was a state housing authority proposed. And when I was in Sacramento, you know what they were talking about? Cities that were non-compliant. What they'll do later with those sites is force whatever they want on those sites. And again, I mean, it's down the road, but you're hearing these rumors. And so I would make certain that whatever sites that are approved, you know if they've been on, how many times they've been on, whether it's the vacant site or previous site. Because honestly, as a past real estate professional, and I have several properties where I've ran numbers with many different professionals, They might be feasible for sites for housing, but they're not economically feasible as they stand now. But if you give somebody the right to come and do whatever they want, as long as it meets the threshold of a certain manner of units, then they will be coming. So in a way, it accelerates it. But again, is that planning? Are we putting a plan in place that's going to let somebody come into this community later on and do whatever the bleep they want? So I would look at that list, and then I mean, you're already ready past, I mean, you're way beyond worrying about being compliant or non-compliant. That ship's left the harbor in January. And, you know, if there was going to be a flood, you would have had the flood. Everybody else has already received tons of those if it were there. But get that list to see how many sites that if you put on are going to be, and then make sure that the Bailey that will now become part of our housing element, if it's incorporated, doesn't give us that flexibility, so we don't have to raise heights to 4 stories or 5 stories and the FAR to 75 rather than 50. And if it is, and that is not a transportation center, you're gonna run all the businesses out of Old Town if there's no place to park. And you're gonna increase your floor area to 75% and the height to 4-story. And it's gonna be by right because they were on the previous thing. So please, 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 plan accordingly. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Anyone on the phone?
No one on the line.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment.
Have a couple more. Based on what Mr. Gonzalez was saying, I'd like some clarification. I thought we had produced the old list. Is that available?
I remember
Is that on your website?
So we do have a list. We've been working with the consultant on that. We've had to go back and look at the 4th and 5th elements. So those are in our office, and we have those documents. So if that's something that you would like us to post to our website, we can. And anyone who requests it through a public records request, more than happy to provide that. So that was,
I've heard that question multiple times, so
Yeah.
if it's reasonable to post it, I'd like to see us
yeah,
post it.
yeah, I'm gonna note it down, and we can post it on our website.
The tax rates, I've had confusion on that for some time now. I know that the housing projects that are brought in by nonprofits are not on the tax rolls. I'm just waiting till you catch up. So I know the housing projects that get put out by nonprofits are not on the tax rolls. If I do a development and get a 20% affordable housing density bonus, whatever it's, but does that 20% go off the tax rolls?
So I don't have our finance department here, but it is my understanding, attending, meetings in the past, that those nonprofits do not pay property tax. So yeah, that's been brought up a lot in past years in at city council meetings, so that is correct. So, I mean, just the fact that something's affordable doesn't necessarily make it go off the tax roll.
Let me repeat my question, so you're answering I agree with the nonprofits, whether I like it or not, I understand it. The question is the affordable housing, I'll use the number 20% that people use to get their benefits and streamlining and all that stuff, does that go off the tax rolls?
I don't believe so, but I could bring that back, and I'll ask our housing division.
I don't believe it is either, but there's
I
a
don't
lot of
believe it is
people in the
either.
community, I think, believe that.
But like the one that's real popular that everybody talks about year after year after year is the Housing Authority. So the Housing Authority has built several low-income projects that have covenants. And actually, the list, it's very, very much announced in this document. There's a list, there's a table. I want to say there's about 12 to 15. I believe all those ones are not paying property tax, but I just don't have that at my fingertips.
Yeah, well, but what I'm asking about is the the ones we're talking about in here, are those going off?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Would you validate that for us?
Yeah, I can ask our finance department.
And then Bailey's in the county, and you're in, I believe, negotiations to have that somehow moved to the city. Is that true?
So this one's a little bit complicated, but let me do my best. The reason why it's complicated is it's an ongoing negotiation between the city and the county. So the meeting that we had, I want to say it was about 4 months ago, in downtown Santa Barbara with the county and LAFCO and the city all at the same table is we seem to be on the same page, both the county and the city, to allow what they're calling Bodger Meadows, which is about 350, 360 homes to be built outside our city limits. We seem to be in agreement that would be annexed into the city. Where it gets complicated is the timing. Would that be annexed right away before you actually see the housing units built? Or would it be annexed after that project is entitled and developed in the county? Or we're having his office help us with that. We're just not even close to getting to that point yet. Because right now they're going through the county with a map and also a development plan, and they're doing all their CEQA, which is probably gonna take 2 years. I hate to say that. And so, even though it's a builder's remedy, they still have to do CEQA. But that's an ongoing negotiation that the city and the county are doing, and LAFCO will have its role as well when it ultimately, we have to amend our sphere of influence and we have to annex it. And the timing is gonna be tricky. So, I'll just say for the record that if they build it in the county, they're gonna get the arena, not us. But there is a consensus that that will be annexed into the city. But the timing, I don't know yet.
So, so unless it's annexed, you cannot count it towards those numbers.
Correct, yeah, that will not be counted towards our arena. So the comment that was made earlier wouldn't be even relevant if that's not gonna be developed in the city limits. So not even if it was developed in the sphere of influence. Both of those, that property's not in our sphere and it's not in the city limits.
Did I hear you quickly say the county rented it?
What's that?
Did I hear you quickly say that the county was using it for the arena?
They would if it was entitled and built in the county. They would be able to
We have-
receive the arena for that.
We have pending projects we used in the numbers?
Yeah, but those are in the city limits. Yeah, we don't have,
Well-
HCD will not count anything that's not within our city limits. And we actually had a pretty good conversation with our consultant about that. And the answer was continuously no.
But you said the county couldn't do it because it wasn't entitled.
Couldn't do what?
Put it in the arena numbers to meet their housing element.
Yeah, it's, well, right now, again, it gets a little complicated, but it's an ag zone right now. It's not in the county, it's not even residential land. So, the timing of when the credit would be used for RENA is a little tricky. It's not entitled yet. And it hasn't been, the zoning hasn't been changed to accommodate it, so it's a little tricky. It's kind of a legal exercise, to be quite honest. It's tricky.
Sorry. So unless that was residential, then they could use it in their numbers, but because it's still ag, they can't count it towards the arena.
Not yet, it's not entitled,
I don't
it's
think
not,
that's a correct statement.
yeah. They can't get credit now, in their housing cycle, they did not count this Bodger Meadows as part of their arena.
We
So this
counted-
sixth cycle, it was not counted.
We counted lots of things in our general plan that said, oh, we're gonna have to go rezone this. So they could, that statement, I just don't think is correct.
Well, I know for a fact that it was not included in their housing element. Yeah. So if it's not included in their housing element, they're not gonna get credit yet, but they want credit.
But they could have put it in there
I don't know.
and said that they could have.
I don't know yet. It's not that easy. Sorry, this is a county project. You guys are asking me questions about a county project. I just don't have all the information, and I certainly don't have a legal analysis in front of me for something like that.
Do you have any other questions, commissioners?
Mr. Hare, I have ones to fall out tonight.
Since we have our consultant on the line, do you have any other questions for Ryan Lester with Midyar Harnish?
I don't have any.
So, say we approve it, goes to city council, right? And when is the drop dead date? It has to be to the state.
I mean, we're just trying to do it as soon as possible by the end of the year, because we're non-compliant right now in as far as a state certified housing element. So it's adopted, but it's non-compliant. So the longer we wait, the longer, one, funding could be jeopardized, and the longer that the builder's remedy would apply, and there might be other things that would impact us.
Well, ultimately, the worst case is the state can come take over our planning authority, which they've threatened with a couple of cities that have gone that far. But at this point, the immediate effects would be the builder's remedy.
I think that the funding is what they're concerned about, and at least in the staff report, the one funding I believe I saw was the ADU. And have you received the ADU funding already?
So we now have a signed contract with our regional planning agency, which reports to the state. We haven't received a check yet, but we have an agreement now that's been reviewed by our city attorney's office. It's signed, sealed, and delivered. And last week, we got 3 companies that are interested in, and they provided proposals for that program, and we're gonna actually be doing interviews in 2 weeks.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Before we make a motion, I just want to make sure that as councils and things segue, I think we got to get this on before new council takes over. Because I fear that if we don't get this done by the read-in of new people, it's like we're back to, we're back to waiting at the bus stop for the bus to come pick us up. So I'm worried about that. So if it doesn't get up there, I mean, do we think that it's going to get there in time for next month's meeting?
Depending on your recommendation tonight, I believe, I'm very confident that we can get it on the second city council meeting. I've already earmarked it.
I'd like to entertain a motion. Either one.
Well, I'm not gonna make a motion because I've already had experience with approving red line documents. So, I'm not gonna make a motion on red line.
No, but I think we do owe it to get to the meeting by the 19th of November. Right, red lines are red lines. We've had, if we can make those, because I'm sure I'm trying to wrap my head around, when you reach to the state comes back, right? You guys are doing this, they're like assessors, right? So you're providing documentation, they review, they assess, they give you comments and feedbacks from that accessory document to say, hey, these are the recommended changes to go back and do, right? So I'm sure that data is something that you guys, share back and forth with each other, right? So we're seeing the provisions that say, hey, in order to become compliant, these are the measures or countermeasures to apply or change verbs or nouns to this or that. I know we're kind of hung up on red lines. I know I'm acting like a hypocrite because I talked about red lines in the previous document of not having enough time to read it. But I think for this, we've read it so much and it's been a part of our fixture for well over a year now or longer, that I make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation. We present this to City Council for the 19th of November meeting. For that point, then to put it in City Council's hands to say yay or nay, to reject or non-reject.
Before we have a second, and you say you don't like the red lines, what would you want to see? Then do it.
Well, that's a fair question, because I don't think we did any red lines tonight. That's a fair question.
If I could real quickly interject, just, and then you can continue that thought. The only reason why we have that is because it is a little easier to present and be more transparent when it comes to changes that were made to the document. I know there's kind of a leniency to give them clean documents, but I will say it does become much easier to show them what has changed. So, and I think you have something. But go ahead and continue.
Is it your intent to provide them this document or a clean document?
I'm sorry, could you continue that line of thought in regards to the red lines?
I was questioning whether it's your intention to provide City Council the document you provided to us?
Absolutely, exactly the way. I'm not gonna make anything. I'm literally gonna package this up, just like it was tonight.
With all the red lines in green and...
Correct, yeah, correct. Now, if the city council approves it, a clean version will be delivered to the state right after that action.
So the only comment I would make, not to be disrespectful, but I don't believe that council's gonna read this. I just didn't know how much effort it took for me. So whatever we say is approved time with recommended. I didn't have any red lines too, because it was mostly procedural. Yes, the height is, that's it. The parking, I feel like we should take separate hold of it. So much, my personal opinion on parking is, it's so bastardized now. If you build a single-family home, you gotta have covered parking. But if you convert that covered parking into an ADU, you don't have to have any parking. And Old Town used to be no parking, but now it's 5 years. And unless you were grandfathered in, you gotta have parking. It's just so bastardized in my opinion. So I don't think the general plan is gonna make any zoning level. So I kind of feel like the city council's already approved this plan.
So it sounds like we have a first, but we're looking for a second.
I'll second.
It was so painful.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so it passes 3-0. All right, thank you. If we can move on along on the agenda now. And I'm gonna take the consultant off the line and we'll revisit later. Looks like he's off.
Okay, we're gonna move on to new business,
There is none.
oral communications. No one is on the phone.
Nobody is on the phone.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close oral communications. Any written communications?
Staff does not have any.
Okay. Commission requests?
We actually skipped a director.
Oh, sorry, director staff communication.
I do have a few items. One is I think we decided, but we'll revisit that in a minute regarding rescheduling the November meeting. So a couple of things I wanted to bring to your attention. Next week, I'll give the same presentation that I did to the Planning Commission last month on the current projects that the city's currently processing, including the Bodger project. I'll briefly talk about that. We already talked about the permit-ready ADU program, so I would like to update you more next month. So hopefully, we'll have a firm selected, and so next month, we'll talk to you a little bit about that. We do have 3 good proposals from 3 different companies. And then the only other thing I was going to bring to your attention is there is going to be a city hall closure. We have 2 holidays, the week of Christmas, but then also the city council last month closed 3 additional days, so that whole week during Christmas will be closed. So it's just so that you know, because city business will not occur during that last week of December. And the only other thing is when we get to it, I'd like to just make sure that our next meeting will be November 6th as opposed to November 13th as the agenda shows.
I have a quick question. I know you said you're gonna give us more info about the ADUs next month, but do you have an estimate on when the estimated time you would like to see those plans ready for people to utilize?
Yeah, good question. So we told the consultant 18 months, but it's actually going to be less because by the time we select the company and we go into contract, it's probably going to be like 16 months. But they all say that they could meet that timeline, and it's really, if we don't do it within that timeline, we lose our funding, which is in the tune of $440-something thousand. So no pressure on me. But we will get it done, and we are excited about the program because there are a lot of properties in Lompoc where there's alleys, which I think are really a great type of lot that the city has, and there's deep lots where people can build an ADU in their backyard and still have access off an alley. And then there's some properties that are just really underutilized, which we've talked a lot during the housing element, that it can accommodate an ADU.
So we're thinking 2026 then?
Correct.
Oh, wow. Any commission requests?
Well, I only have one, just as a follow-up. I know a while back we approved the ambulance facility here right across from headquarters. Is that on hold because of litigation with the county about AMR and the county and all of the ambulance service?
Yep, you're exactly right.
Okay.
There is a lawsuit, and the chief, I think about 2 months ago, came to me and said it's not happening. Now, if for some reason the lawsuit goes in the opposite direction of where we think it's going to go, then they might revisit it. But as of now, it looks like they're not going to build the paramedic station, unfortunately, across from Station 1.
Interesting, okay.
Yep.
Okay, there's no other commission requests. And then when I adjourn this meeting, is it a special meeting or a regular meeting?
I think it's going to be considered special because it's not the meeting on our calendar, so it would be November 6th instead. So
Okay.
we'll send out reminders, Ceci and I will send out reminders to make sure that, you don't show up on the 13th, that you show up on the 6th.
Okay, so I adjourn this to a special meeting at 6:30 on Wednesday, November 6th.
Correct.